I remember the day my new wife Tessa walked out of our tiny apartment as though it were some cheap hostel she had only planned to stay in for one night. We'd been married for precisely 1 month and 2 days, still technically in the honeymoon stage, or so I'd foolishly believed. The morning she left, I had woken up early, excited to make her breakfast in bed. I still recall her favorite meal: scrambled eggs lightly seasoned with rosemary, crispy bacon with just a hint of maple syrup, and a fresh croissant from the little bakery around the corner. She had told me she loved being surprised with thoughtful gestures, and I was determined to uphold my vow to make our new life together feel special. But that morning, I received a text message from her at 7:38 a.m. A text. It read, "I can't do this. I'm sorry. I've gone back to Paul. I hope you find someone who really loves you." My breakfast tray in hand, I stood motionless in the doorway of our bedroom, reading that single sentence over and over. The hollowness set in first, followed by a wave of nausea that sent me collapsing onto the bed where we had lain together just hours before. The entire room turned cold as I realized that our life together, our marriage, our unmade plans, our shared morning routines, was over. And it wasn't just because Tessa decided she didn't love me anymore. It was because she'd gone running back to her ex, a man she had once assured me was toxic and completely out of her life. The betrayal rattled my sense of self, left me with a million questions, and inflicted wounds on my pride that took months to heal. In the days immediately after her departure, I found myself reliving every conversation we'd had. I tried to piece together clues I might have missed. The hushed, late-night phone calls, the text messages she would sometimes hide from me by turning her phone screen away, the way her eyes would drift off whenever she was on the couch, lost in thoughts she didn't care to share. I saw those moments in a different light, realizing that she had never fully left Paul behind. Perhaps she had been comparing me to him from the very start, weighing my every gesture against something he had done in the past or might do in the future. But it was the way she left, the method she chose, that stung the most. A text message. No real conversation, no chance for me to at least ask why. Just a single, short message that shattered my world. All my neatly organized illusions about our marriage came crashing down as I stared at that text. The only person I had told that day was my older sister, Mary Ann. She spent the afternoon with me, a silent pillar of support, just letting me exist in the shock without pushing me to snap out of it. That evening, she took me out to a diner where she forced me to eat a plate of greasy fries, trying to distract me with talk about a new real estate deal she was working on. But the emptiness inside me was too vast to be filled by any comfort food. I spent the next few months trying to regain my footing. I went back to my job as an accountant, burying myself in spreadsheets and financial statements. In the loneliness of my apartment, I would replay Tessa's text in my mind, reading it until it felt as though it were etched into my skull. I felt ashamed. I felt foolish. And worst of all, I felt that I had lost a part of myself I might never get back. But I eventually learned something crucial: survival. So I forced myself to talk to people, to pretend that I was doing fine, to go through the motions of living like a functioning adult. I refused to let Tessa's betrayal define me any longer. One night, after I'd spent hours at my desk trying to juggle a last-minute audit for a client, I took a long walk through the quiet streets of my neighborhood. The street lamps had that yellowish glow that makes everything look old and tired. In the distance, I could hear the rumble of cars on the highway. That's when I ran into an old friend, Denise, who was coming home late from a book club meeting. She recognized the weight in my eyes. We ended up talking for hours on a park bench, where she confessed she had once been through a similar heartbreak, though not as abrupt or disorienting as mine. There was a small sense of solace in hearing that I wasn't alone in this kind of pain. The guilt, the anger, the endless questions, they were all normal, she said. That conversation was a catalyst for me. Over the next few weeks, I found myself confiding in friends and family with a new openness, recounting the betrayal without breaking down, analyzing the red flags I'd missed, and looking for ways to move forward. The swirling anger I'd initially felt toward Tessa began to simmer down, morphing into a quiet resentment. I told myself I wasn't going to let her have any more space in my mind than she already had. It was time to start living again, or at least try. As the months wore on, I tried to piece my life back together. I started going to the gym more often, not out of any newfound dedication to fitness, but because I needed the distraction that physical pain offered over the emotional kind. Sweating on the treadmill, pushing myself on the weight machines, these were moments where my mind couldn't fixate on Tessa. Instead, I was forced to focus on breathing, on counting reps, on the burn in my muscles. My boss noticed the change in me at work too. He recognized that while I was more subdued in personal interactions, I was far more thorough in my tasks, more detail-oriented. He assigned me to bigger projects, praising my efficiency. That was a bittersweet victory. It felt good to be recognized, to feel competent at something, but it only hammered home just how hollow my personal life had become. I had no one to celebrate these small wins with at night. Marianne tried to set me up on blind dates with people she thought were suitable. I went on a few, but each one felt like a forced exercise in normalcy. I smiled, I nodded, I asked questions, but my heart was never in it. The same questions circled in my mind. Am I ready for this? Should I even be here, making small talk with a stranger, when a major part of me is still mourning what Tessa did? My days blurred together in a fog of work, gym sessions, half-hearted social outings, and nights spent staring at the ceiling, wondering how I had gotten it all so wrong. A year crawled by, and with each passing month, my resentment festered under the surface. I tried to hide it behind a veneer of politeness, but every so often, a stray thought would cross my mind. If I ever see Tessa again, what would I say? I never allowed myself to fully explore that question, perhaps scared of how deep my anger might run. Life, in its twisted sense of humor, soon provided an answer. By sheer coincidence, I found out from a mutual acquaintance that Tessa was engaged again. The ex she had left me for, Paul, had apparently gone through some personal epiphany, deciding Tessa was the love of his life after all. They were planning a grand wedding, rumored to be lavish enough to make a Kardashian jealous. Hearing that news was like a punch to the gut, but strangely, it also gave me a measure of closure. It was as if the final page of the chapter titled Tessa and Me had been turned. I told myself, she's happy, she got what she wanted, and now I can be free to focus on my own life. And for a while, I did. I made it a point to expand my social circle, joining a volunteer group that helped refurbish old homes. It was a hands-on project that required teamwork and patience, and I found a surprising sense of camaraderie with the other volunteers. I met people from all walks of life, each carrying stories of heartbreaks, triumphs, and everything in between. My perspective began to broaden, my empathy growing for those who had stumbled and lost. Slowly, I began to feel like I was reclaiming parts of myself I'd lost in the wreckage of that text message. Then, out of nowhere, everything changed again. One weekend, Marianne dragged me to a friend's wedding on the outskirts of town. It was a rustic barn affair, complete with mason jar centerpieces and twinkling fairy lights strung across the rafters. We arrived just before the ceremony, mingling with people I'd never met, making small talk about the weather and the newlyweds. That's when I saw Paul and Tessa in the crowd, him in a sharp gray suit, her in a pastel dress. They weren't the bride and groom, but they seemed to be intimately involved with the wedding party. My heart hammered. I tried to discreetly avoid them, hoping they wouldn't notice me, but within minutes, Tessa spotted me from across the room. Her eyes widened, and for a second, I thought she looked apprehensive? Guilty? I was in no mood for pleasantries, so I wandered toward the bar to find some liquid courage. While I waited for the bartender to fix me a bourbon, I felt a tap on my shoulder. It was Paul. He had a too-friendly smile plastered on his face, the kind you see on used car salesmen. He extended a hand, which I reluctantly shook. He said, "Hey man, it's been a while. Listen, no hard feelings, right?" The audacity almost made me laugh. But I remembered my vow not to let them occupy more of my mental space. So I kept my face neutral and said, "We're all good," and turned my attention back to my drink. He seemed satisfied, grinning as though we'd just become best buddies. Tessa approached us moments later, her expression unreadable. "You look well," she said. I simply nodded. She stared at me for a moment longer than I was comfortable with, then Paul guided her away, placing a possessive hand on her lower back. I finished my drink, more than ready to leave once Marianne's friend said her vows. I didn't realize that day at the barn wedding would set off a chain of events that would eventually blow up their relationship in the most public way possible. But fate has a twisted sense of timing, and I was about to find out just how deeply betrayal can cut, and how karma can pay people back. About 6 months after the barn wedding, I got a frantic call from my friend Maurice, who happened to run a small catering business. He was in a panic, needing some extra help for a big wedding gig. He promised free drinks and a decent paycheck for a few hours of lugging around trays of appetizers and filling champagne glasses. I agreed, desperate for a break from the monotony of my day job and also thinking it might be a fun diversion. On the day of the event, I showed up in black slacks, a crisp white shirt, and a tie, ready to play my part. As I unloaded crates of glassware with Maurice, I wondered aloud about the lucky couple. He shrugged, more focused on making sure everything was in order. The venue was a grand old mansion on a hill, boasting manicured lawns and a breathtaking view of the city below. White folding chairs were lined up in neat rows on the lawn, facing an elegant floral arch. The scent of lilies and roses permeated the air. I was assigned to pass out small flutes of champagne to the arriving guests, so I positioned myself near the entrance. That's when I saw Tessa's mother, followed by Tessa's best friend from college. My heart skipped a beat. I watched, slightly stunned, as more familiar faces from Tessa's side of the family filed past me. Confusion overwhelmed me. Was Tessa about to tie the knot with Paul in this opulent setting? Had they decided on a second engagement party or something bigger than the first? My mind buzzed with questions I had no immediate answers for. Maurice, noticing my pale face, asked if I was okay. I forced a smile, telling him I just needed a breath of fresh air, but I couldn't slip away just yet. Guests were pouring in faster than we could hand out drinks. So I sucked it up, plastering on my best professional face, and greeted each guest with a polite nod and a glass of champagne. About 20 minutes later, I spotted Paul walking toward the ceremony area with a group of groomsmen. He was wearing a sharp tuxedo, his hair styled with a precision that spoke of a professional's touch. For a moment, time seemed to slow. It was like I was watching a scene out of someone else's life, a bizarre cross-section of my past intruding upon my present. Then Tessa appeared. She was dressed in a simple yet elegant wedding gown, holding a small bouquet of pink roses. I couldn't breathe. My hands trembled, nearly spilling the tray of drinks I was holding. It was official. Tessa and Paul were getting married, and I was unintentionally part of the catering staff for their big day. Fate, it seemed, was playing a twisted joke on me. As the ceremony time drew near, the guests took their seats. I was shuffled off to help line up the wedding party near the arch. Standing behind a pillar, I watched Tessa and Paul exchange hushed words, their faces a cocktail of excitement and nerves. Then something unexpected happened. Paul's voice, though quiet at first, began to rise. I couldn't make out every word, but phrases like, "I know what you did," and "You lied to me," rang out. Tessa's face turned ashen, her bouquet trembling. At first, I thought it was just pre-wedding jitters blown out of proportion. But as the volume escalated, Paul shouted, "You were hooking up with him this whole time, weren't you? You never let him go." He pointed a trembling finger in my direction. Shock tore through me like an electric current. The bridesmaids gasped, stepping back as though Tessa were radioactive. I felt hundreds of eyes turn toward me, confusion evident in their stares. My mind spun. What in the world was Paul accusing us of? The hush that fell over the venue was deafening. Tessa stammered, her words barely coherent, trying to explain that I had nothing to do with whatever Paul was ranting about. But Paul wouldn't hear it. He tossed the ring onto the grass, pointed at me again, and barked, "Ask him! Ask your precious ex-husband!" People in the rows began whispering, some even standing up to get a better view of the spectacle. Tessa, tears streaming, tried to approach Paul, but he backed away as though she were contaminated. Finally, in a dramatic flourish, he shouted, "This wedding is off!" and stormed past the shocked crowd. The entire ceremony erupted into chaos. Some guests hurried after him, while others flocked to Tessa, who stood there shaking, mascara running down her cheeks. I stood frozen, the tray still in my hands, my heart pounding like a jackhammer. My mind screamed at me to say something, anything, to clear my name, but no words formed on my lips. The next thing I knew, Tessa was running toward me. "You have to explain," she cried. "Tell him we're not having an affair. Tell him he's got it all wrong." She grabbed my arm desperately. Confusion and a certain level of schadenfreude battled within me. All I could manage to say was, "Why would he think that?" Her eyes were wild. "He got this crazy idea that I never stopped talking to you, that we've been sneaking around behind his back. It's insane. I never even considered..." She trailed off, the weight of the moment crushing her. In that split second, I realized that the humiliated figure before me was the same woman who'd left me for her toxic ex without a second thought. Any pity I felt was overshadowed by the memory of that morning text that shattered my life. This was Tessa's day of reckoning, and it had arrived in the grandest way possible. She pleaded with me once more, her voice breaking. "Please, I need your help. If you talk to Paul, he'll listen. He's convinced you and I have been sneaking around, but if you just explain—" I took a step back, ignoring the stares from the stunned guests. My voice was quiet, but my resolve was ironclad. "No, Tessa, this is karma. It's coming full circle." I turned on my heel and walked away, leaving her standing there in her wedding dress, tears of shock and desperation streaming down her face. My heart pounded as I headed behind the mansion, needing space to breathe. I couldn't believe what had just happened, how the universe had orchestrated this moment of cosmic irony. Tessa had betrayed me, and now, on the day she was supposed to find her own version of marital bliss, her fiancé had abandoned her in front of everyone, accusing her of an affair with me, a man who wanted nothing to do with her. There was a part of me that felt grim satisfaction. Maybe it was petty, but after the humiliation I had suffered, it was cathartic to witness Tessa's perfect day crumble. I knew I should probably leave, but Maurice was my friend, and I owed him a completed shift. So I stayed, quietly helping the other staff pack up the untouched wedding cake and bottles of champagne that would no longer be popped. Paul had left in a fury, and Tessa eventually retreated to a small dressing room with her mother and a few close friends, none of whom looked particularly sympathetic. I heard whispers that Paul refused to see her, that he believed she'd manipulated him into an entire relationship based on lies and half-truths. Though the details were murky, it seemed that someone had fed him the rumor that Tessa was rekindling something with me. And, in a spectacular twist, Tessa's dirty laundry came spilling out for the world to see. Later that night, after the guests had dispersed in a swarm of murmured gossip and pitying glances, I saw Tessa sitting alone on a stone bench by the mansion's flower garden. Her makeup was smeared and she looked drained of life. The wedding gown, once pristine, was now stained at the hem by grass and dirt. When she noticed me, she stood up, hugging herself. "Please," she started, but her voice cracked. "You have to help me fix this. I know you hate me. I know I hurt you, but I swear this is a misunderstanding. I never cheated on Paul. I left you for him, yes, but after we got engaged, I was faithful to him. I never even spoke to you." She stopped, her pleading eyes searching my face for any glimmer of empathy. I took a deep breath, recalling the months of agony I endured after she left. The endless nights of questioning my own worth, the shame of being abandoned like yesterday's news. I was not about to offer Tessa a lifeline. "Look," I said quietly, "I'm not going to lie to Paul for you. Even if he were willing to talk to me, which he clearly isn't, I'm not stepping into this mess. You made your choices. You kicked me out of your life like I was nothing. You walked away. Now you're left with the consequences. But you're innocent in this. He dragged your name into it for no reason. Doesn't that bother you?" "It doesn't bother me nearly as much as what you did," I answered calmly. Silence hung between us for a moment. "I'm sorry," she finally whispered, voice barely audible. "I really am." My jaw tightened. "You're not just sorry. You're desperate to salvage your reputation. But I'm done. I'm not your savior, Tessa. You threw away that right the minute you decided I wasn't worth an actual conversation when you left. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have work to finish." I turned and walked back inside, feeling a mix of liberation and lingering sorrow. Maybe if she had offered a genuine apology earlier, maybe if she had shown some real remorse before her life fell apart, things would have turned out differently. But life rarely hands out neat endings. In the days following that disastrous wedding, rumors ran rampant among our mutual acquaintances. Some claimed Paul discovered suspicious text messages from an unknown number on Tessa's phone. Others whispered that Tessa, in a drunk moment at her bachelorette party, confessed she sometimes missed me. Whatever the spark, it ignited Paul's paranoia, leading him to believe Tessa had orchestrated a grand lie. He had chosen the most theatrical moment possible to confront her, ensuring maximum humiliation. As for me, I tried to stay above the fray. I changed my number, blocked Tessa and her entire circle on social media, and immersed myself in my work and volunteer activities. The chaos was no longer my responsibility, and I wasn't about to let it consume me again. That was the sweet revenge I never thought I'd experience. Not the act of hurting her, but the knowledge that I no longer cared enough to help her, even if it would clear my own name. About a week later, I ran into Paul in an unexpected place, the local grocery store. He was in the produce aisle, staring at a display of apples, lost in thought. I hesitated, then decided to walk past him as if I hadn't seen him. But he spotted me. He rushed forward, looking disheveled, a far cry from the polished groom in that tuxedo. "Hey," he muttered, eyes darting around. I owe you an apology, I guess." He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing up and down. "I know you weren't messing around with Tessa. I found out the messages were from, well, someone else. Or maybe no one at all. She might have just been venting to a friend about missing certain aspects of her past, and I jumped to conclusions." He ran a hand through his hair, looking genuinely remorseful. "I messed up, big time." I regarded him coolly, remembering all the pain he and Tessa had collectively caused me. "You didn't just mess up, you humiliated her publicly, and you dragged me into your drama. Now you want forgiveness?" He looked down at his shoes, exhaling heavily. "I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just needed to say sorry. I needed you to know I was wrong." For a brief moment, I contemplated how Tessa must be feeling, how Paul must be feeling. But then I remembered how little either of them thought of me when they decided to blow up my life. So I just nodded, letting him stew in his guilt. Then I turned and walked away, leaving him in the produce aisle, another ghost from a past I was determined to leave behind. A few weeks later, Marianne told me Tessa left town to stay with an aunt in another state. She was apparently trying to escape the rumors and piece her life back together. The wedding fiasco had cost her more than a groom. She lost her job, as it turned out her boss was Paul's cousin, and faced questions from family and friends about what really went down. She had hit rock bottom, and maybe that was exactly the karmic debt she had to pay. I didn't feel sorry for her. That might make me sound callous, but I'd learned that sometimes letting people face the consequences of their actions is the only way everyone can move on. I focused on my own life, on building something meaningful out of the rubble. I purchased a small condo in a quieter part of town, adopting a stray dog I named Rocco, whose unconditional affection helped me heal more than any therapy session could. I grew closer with my sister, took on new challenges at work, and gradually felt a sense of wholeness returning. Every now and then, a stray thought of Tessa would cross my mind, but it no longer carried the sting it once did. It was just a memory, a lesson learned. The world spins on, and life always finds a way to remind us that every action has its price. Tessa had made her choice to leave me in the most callous way possible. Paul had made his choice to humiliate her when he suspected a betrayal of his own, and I had made my choice to cut ties with them both. None of us were blameless in the grand scheme of relationships, but at least I could hold my head high, knowing I hadn't stooped to their level. I hadn't needed revenge served hot. The universe had delivered the cold dish for me, and it tasted like justice. Looking back on that fiasco, I realized how liberating it is to walk away from people who are toxic to your well-being. Tessa thought she'd found happiness with Paul, only to discover he had an equally cruel side to him, a side that rivaled her own capacity for hurting others. In the end, neither one got their storybook ending, and I, in a strange twist of fate, found the closure I never thought I'd have. Sometimes it takes witnessing the downfall of those who wronged us to fully understand that we truly deserve better. And I do. I deserve better than the scraps Tessa offered me. I deserve a life free from second-guessing my worth. My final conversation with Tessa at that ruined wedding was the last page in our story, and it felt damn good to slam that chapter shut, never to reopen it again.